schedule. That was the real purpose of the assignment. I know some of you are shy or nervous or whatever it is that makes you not want to ask questions. So I really want to make sure that there are questions. And also I have a list of questions from the online class so that they can participate somewhat. While we're waiting for him, I will hand out the handouts that he brought us. Nothing right, not right now.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
And I left mine at home. I'll have to bring mine next week. I forgot.
We just went and got the biggest piece of pie.
So I'll just scan them in
And then we added
and
them.
email them or something.
Yeah, not too worried.
It took us about 4 weeks.
I know that you were all heartbroken to get the message that says that the last class before Thanksgiving is canceled. I share your sorrow. I will miss you too.
Persevering.
It will be worth it to wait for her to come when she's able to come. And it didn't seem worth it to rearrange the whole schedule just for the one day before Thanksgiving. So you can spend that day doing something else. This is the, for those of you who didn't have a chance to read the bio, Michael Doherty is the district attorney for the 20th Judicial District, that's Boulder County. He was just elected, having been reappointed the first time to fill in, was just appointed by the person who was leaving, or however that works, he'll explain it, to finish out a term, and then was just elected. I handed all these out for you while we were. And since I'm sure you'd rather hear him than me, I'm gonna stop talking.
Good morning. My name is Michael Doherty. I'm the district attorney for the 20th Judicial District, which is Boulder County. And I'm going to talk to you about the role of the district attorney and also how the criminal justice system works and how it can work better, but also media relations between the district attorney, media, law enforcement, and some of the topics that you might be interested in given the studies that you've been going through with Lisa thus far. I'll start though, since you're all college students, I assume, right? All right. How many of you are sophomores? Freshman? Junior? I was getting worried from that there. And finally senior? Okay, very good. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then I'm really happy to take any questions you have, and I'll stop as we go through this to invite you to ask me questions. You can ask me anything you want, and I'll do my best to answer it directly. So my background, how I ended up where I am today, I went to high school on Long Island in New York. Coming out of high school, my family did not have much money, so I went to community college. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I was coming out of high school. Went to community college for 2 years. During that time, I paid for community college by loading trucks for UPS at night and working at a deli on the weekends. And that was a great wake-up call for me, because although I had done perfectly fine in high school, I had not committed myself to doing the very best that I could with studying and academics. And suddenly loading trucks at night and going to school during the day and recognizing that the professor in front of the room was in part being paid for by my parents and their hard work, but also my hard work loading trucks. I gave it everything I could. I did very well, thankfully, and then I went from there on to Cornell University to get my bachelor's, and then ultimately to Boston University for law school. I went to law school knowing I wanted to go into public service, into public interest, but not yet having any idea that I wanted to be a prosecutor. In fact, at the time, I didn't have the greatest or most positive view of law enforcement and prosecutors. But what changed for me over time was I started the first summer of law school. I went to the public defender's office in California to represent an individual who'd been convicted of a murder and was on death row awaiting execution. His name is James Hardy. So that entire summer, I just worked on James' case as an intern, helping out the attorneys on the case. I visited him on death row at San Quentin. And I went back to law school knowing I wanted to go into criminal justice and thinking I wanted to become a public defender representing poor people who have been accused of crime. Throughout my next 2 years in law school, I worked for public defender's offices, but I had a professor who to this day is very much a mentor to me, who convinced me that I should be more open-minded about district attorneys. And I'll share with you a moment that I'm somewhat embarrassed and amused by every time I think of it now. But I remember telling him, like, prosecutors are just stormtroopers. They're just trying to convict people and send people to prison. And he said, that's been your experience with this particular DA's office, where you've worked on behalf of clients, but that's not true for every DA's office. If you go to the right place, the mission is to do justice and do the right thing. So coming out of law school, I was applying to both public defender's offices and district attorney's offices. And I had the opportunity to go through the interview process at the Manhattan DA's office in New York City. And every single one of the 4 interviews they do there, they stress the mission of doing justice and doing the right thing. Not just justice for the victim, but also for the community and for the accused. And I realized that that was a place that I wanted to go to be fulfilled and to be passionate about my career. I think that's the most important thing I'll share with you today, from my perspective, is that you should find a job that you love. I'm not here to sell you on being a prosecutor. I may try that, but I'm gonna just really talk to you about the criminal justice system. But the thing I really want to leave you with is finding a job that you feel passionate about. Because life is too short and life is too precious to come home unhappy from work every day. And we all know people who are trapped in that situation for financial reasons or otherwise. But if you're going to be graduating from school soon, you're going to come to a crossroads where you have an opportunity to make a choice. And I just always want to emphasize to people in your shoes, and remember for myself, that we should always have a job that we love and never settle for anything less. And now here I am, 21 years later, able to say that that's been true for me. I went to the Manhattan DA's office, I specialized in sex crimes and homicide cases. I moved up through the ranks there. I ended up on the executive staff, helping to run the day-to-day operations of the entire office of 1,300 people. And my wife and I were living in Brooklyn, New York, which is where I've been born. But we had the opportunity to move to Boulder, Colorado to start up a wrongful conviction project on a federal grant to look at cases throughout Colorado to see if anybody had been wrongfully convicted and was sitting in state prison who was in fact innocent. So for example, Robert Dewey served 17 years in state prison for a murder he truly did not commit. The murder was committed in Grand Junction. The young woman's name, the victim's name was J.C. Taylor. J.C. had been killed in a house, and Robert Dewey was in the house along with a bunch of other people, and drugs were being used that night, and memories were hazy. And through a variety of different circumstances, Mr. Dewey ended up being identified as the suspect and convicted after a jury trial. He served 17 years in state prison. He was 100% innocent. And our work helped lead to DNA analysis that not only exonerated him, but successfully identified the actual killer, and that led to his arrest and the successful conviction of that person. His name is Douglas Thames. And Mr. Dewey's now out in the community.
That name sounds familiar, actually.
It may sound familiar. There was a fair amount of media attention around it, as there often are when there are exonerations. But to me, that kind of work is absolutely consistent with the prosecutor's mission of doing justice in every case. So we just started in my office the first conviction integrity unit in the entire state of Colorado. Have an effective, transparent, and thorough process to go back and review claims of actual innocence to see if anybody's been wrongfully convicted. So from there, I went on to the AG's office, then I was the second in command for the Jeffco DA's office, and now, as Lisa mentioned, I serve as the district attorney of Boulder. It's an elected position with 4-year terms. I was appointed by the governor because the sitting district attorney left office early to go into private practice to work at a law firm. So I was appointed by the governor, and then I had to stand for election at the primary in June and earlier this week at the general election. So I'm very excited for the work ahead as Boulder's district attorney.
I'm going to interrupt you for just 1 second, I apologize. I don't see enough pens moving, and that's why I'm interrupting him. Remember, you have an assignment when this is over to write a news story. So you should be taking notes so that you have something to write about. And since I know that nobody in here has a phonographic memory, I should be seeing more pens and pencils moving so that I don't get a story that says, this guy came and talked to our class. None of you would do that.
Don't just
Sorry.
write, and he was really great.
Yeah,
More
that too.
detail. Just kidding. So what questions do you have about my background? What would you like to know about being a prosecutor or becoming a prosecutor? You can ask me anything you like before I start talking about the DA's office and the criminal justice system.
Did you say you were your undergrad in?
What's that?
What'd you get your bachelor's degree in?
So when I went to community college, I was there for liberal arts, and then when I went on to the next 2 years to get my bachelor's, I thought I was gonna become a teacher or a counselor, so I went, they had a College of Human Ecology, it was called, and my major was Human Development and Family Studies. And most people who come out of that major are either becoming a teacher or a counselor of some kind. It wasn't until I was just about to graduate college that I actually started to think about law school seriously. So in fact, I took a year off and I worked for a law firm in Midtown Manhattan as a paralegal between college and law school. In part to confirm that I really wanted to go to law school. The best part of that experience though was confirming that I had no interest in going to private practice. I really enjoyed it, it was a good year, but I'm just not fulfilled by or passionate about helping people make money or protect their money. So the work I did in the bankruptcy department of that law firm was not something that I wanted to do after law school. But I realized from working with the attorneys there that I could in fact and wanted to go on to law school. Okay. So we have 2 offices for the Boulder District Attorney's Office. One is in downtown Boulder, the other is in Longmont. We have jurisdiction over all of Boulder County. Any criminal offense ranging from trespass or shoplift up to and including sex assault and homicide. We will have approximately 2,855 felonies filed this year for Boulder. Approximately 900 of those will be violent felonies. We've had 3 murder trials this year and already 3 officer-involved incidents in which a member of the public died as a result of the interaction with the police. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about media relations. But the point being, we're a very busy office in Boulder and throughout different parts of the state. Crime has gone up over the last couple of years. People often ask me why I believe that is. I think it's population growth in part. Colorado continues to be a place that people want to move to. So anytime you have a population increase, you tend to see a crime increase. The easy way to explain it is if you have 10,000 people living in a town or 100,000 people living in a city, where do you think we have more crime? It's usually going to be in the city with 100,000 people. So we've seen an increase there. Also the drug epidemic, which is driving a lot of criminal activity because when people have an overwhelming addiction, they may commit property crimes that they would otherwise not commit. So bike thefts, car break-ins, home burglaries, and so on, we've seen those all go up as well. We've also seen an increase in the number of sex assaults reported. And I'll stop for a moment just to talk about that. First, I'll say that that's not necessarily a bad thing when I say it, because it may not reflect an increase in sex assaults as much as an increase in people being able to come forward and report them. So let's say you have 10 sex assaults committed on a college campus over a weekend. And 10 years ago or 15 years ago, 1 or 2 of them come forward, and now 6 or 7 of them come forward. That doesn't mean there were more sex assaults committed and more people coming forward. And I'd like to believe that we have better support and better training for law enforcement and prosecutors and victim advocates and throughout the system as a whole that allows people to come forward and report sex assaults. So we've seen an increase in those areas. So in our office, we have approximately 90 people. They're incredibly hardworking public servants, prosecutors, criminal investigators, and then a variety of support staff positions. And they work on criminal cases all day, every day. And we work closely with law enforcement, but we don't supervise law enforcement and they don't have authority over our office. We're independent of one another. Although it's a close working relationship because, and I'll take you just briefly through the flow chart on this. As you'll see, most of our cases, nearly every single case we have, comes from law enforcement. So if you open to the flow chart, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but a couple things I'll highlight for you. You'll see at the start of the case, it's law enforcement having made an arrest or issuing a ticket, a summons, in which they charge someone with a crime. For law enforcement to charge someone with a crime in the United States, they have to have probable cause. Probable cause is a lower standard than when we have a trial, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The probable cause means they have reason to believe the person committed the crime that they're charged with. From there, the case moves on. Whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, it takes a different track. For felonies usually take between 4 months to a year to resolve. Misdemeanors can be done, and traffic cases can be done much quicker than that, depending on whether the defendant accepts responsibility and pleads guilty, or if the case is dismissed or goes to trial. So one thing I did want to highlight for you, 2 things about this chart. First, what percentage of cases would you say are resolved by trial as opposed to some other kind of disposition? What would you say? If I said, how many cases go to trial out of our entire caseload, what would you say the percentage is?
10%.
10%, that's a good guess. It's about 5 to 6% go to trial. So it's really interesting because when you watch TV or the movies, you're not watching because you want to see the exciting plea negotiation, right? And when we talk about our jobs, when you ask me about the most important cases or serious cases I've handled or difficult moments, I always think about trials. But they're really a small minority of the cases that we handle. Roughly 90 to 95% of the cases nationwide are resolved by some kind of disposition, which led a Supreme Court justice to once say, we are now a system of pleas and not a system of trials. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. I'd be happy to talk to you more, but I just wanted to highlight that because when you look at this chart and you see how cases proceed through the system, I think that's an important thing to know. The other part that I wanted to note for you is we have a robust restorative justice and diversion program because I strongly believe that we should help people get back on the right track. I've seen horrific cases, but the vast majority of the people who come into the criminal justice system are there because they need help getting back on the right track. They've made a bad decision, went in a bad situation, and we do a better job for them and the community if we could restore them to a more productive place, a better place in their lives. And I look at one statistic when I say that drives me to try to do everything we can to reform the criminal justice system, which is in Colorado, people released from state prison, so they've been convicted of felonies and sent to state prison, 48% of them are back in state prison within 3 years. So 48% back within 3 years. That's roughly a 50% failure rate. We wouldn't accept that for any business, for any class, for any industry. So I think we need to continue to look at how we handle cases and how we treat offenders with an eye towards, for them, for the community, for future victims, and for the taxpayers, we need to do a better job helping them. Plus, the number of people we have incarcerated in the state of Colorado is part of the reason that we have 3 private prisons. By private prisons, I mean they're owned by for-profit corporations. I'm strongly opposed to private prisons. They should be prohibited in the state of Colorado. They should not be allowed to exist in our state. Because if you have someone operating for profit in a prison, they have incentive to put money back in their pocket as opposed to putting every single dollar into the rehabilitation of those individuals. So I'll continue to speak out against private prisons because if I had my prosecutors or the public defender's office or the judges getting a profit based on how they handled certain cases, people would be outraged. We should bring that same sense of outrage and justice to the prison system as well. So we're doing a lot to try to reform the criminal justice system, and I'll talk about a couple of these, and then I'm going to talk about a case scenario with you and media relations, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. We have a mental health pre-file diversion program that we're going to be starting in January to divert low-level offenders with serious mental health disorders out of the jail as quickly as possible and connect them with treatment in the community. Because the last place for a person with serious mental health disorder is a jail cell. No one wants that person there. That's not where they should be treated or housed. So we need to do a better job of treating people with mental health issues in the community as opposed to leaving them in a jail cell. So we're funding from the state and federal grants. We're launching this program in January. We're also going to be having, immigrant protection program to try to establish a strong connection with our immigrant communities. We do that for a few reasons. We want to build trust and confidence in the criminal justice system. We want victims to come forward and report when they've been victimized. And I'll put it to you in a real way. A couple months ago, I was meeting with about 25 Latina women, and they were brought together by this victims group that is helping them. And of the 25 women, there were 4 or 5 who share with me that they're currently being sexually assaulted or physically assaulted by their partner in their home. I don't often feel powerless in my work, but that was a night where I felt powerless, where people are sitting in chairs just like this saying, the man I live with, my husband, my boyfriend, is sexually assaulting me on a regular basis, but I won't come forward because either he and or I could be deported if I come forward. So people may have different views on immigration than I do, but I strongly believe that people should have a legal path to citizenship and employment in this country. If you feel otherwise, that's okay. But here's where we should agree, that someone who's being sexually assaulted should be able to report it so that we can do justice for them and get the perpetrator off the street. And we could develop that system where they can do that without fear of deportation. So in my office, we don't ask for country of origin or legal status. If we learn that a victim or witness is in the country undocumented, we do not report to the federal government. And if a defendant has a case pending with our office and they want to come to the courthouse on a different date because they're concerned about being picked up by ICE, they can contact our office and we have the case set for a different date. And the reason for that is our mission is to do justice and to try to do the right thing. That involves seeing cases through to completion. So we're working on that as well. And then the other one program I wanted to mention, we have others, but I'm just going to mention one more so I can take some questions before we go on, is a hate crimes initiative we just started. So since 2016, there's been an increase in hate crimes throughout the nation, but also here in the state of Colorado. So we started a hate crimes initiative to reach out to affected groups, build a stronger connection between law enforcement and the community, enhance the training for law enforcement and prosecutors. And I will share with you that we had a really powerful event a week and a half ago. We had planned it for months, and I kept adjusting the date and trying to figure out the right date with the people that we're putting it on with, and it was going to be held. It was held at the Jewish Community Center.
They were invited.
They were invited.
I sent them.
Oh, so you heard about it, which is great. I appreciate that, so thank you. But the thing that was obviously incredible about it was that it ended up being within 48 hours of the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue. That obviously had never not been planned. We had planned the event for months, and it just happened. So an event where I was worried that we may not have 50 people in the audience, we had about 550. But law enforcement was there, my office, a bunch of people from my office wanted to be a part of it, and then we had different groups and community organizations participate as well. So we have a number of things going on in the DA's office. Before I turn to talk about media relations, what questions do you have about the criminal justice system? What things do you think are broken in the system that you'd like to see us working on? What do you think we're doing well? What do you want to know about my personal beliefs? Anything you want to ask, you can ask.
I guess my question is, how are you guys partnering with CU Boulder and law enforcement to kind of address the sexual harassment not stories, but allegations that have been going on in the drugging and parties?
So as many of you may know, and if you don't, I'll just touch briefly on the background for that question. It's a great question, thank you. There have been reported druggings at fraternity houses that are actually off campus, but still, obviously, the campus is very focused on it, and it's within my office's jurisdiction as well. So we work very closely with the Boulder Police Department, and CU has a police department as well. And we have what's called a CU DA task force, where members of law enforcement, the CU community, and my office meet. We just met earlier this week on Monday afternoon. And part of what we're doing is trying to do more outreach to the student population, talk about ways to be safe. And I will say that whether or not it's drugging, not that these cases, these are active investigations, but going forward, whether or not you think a friend has been drugged or is highly intoxicated because they've drank too much, we need to make sure that people know that they should stay with their friends, help their friends, and make sure that they're not isolated by perpetrators. The other thing that we're doing is making sure that we're having more resources in place to support victims when they come forward. I want to make sure that victims of campus assaults know that it's up to them whether they call the police or not. It's not up to the campus, it's not up to the school. So it's up to them whether they call the police. And in Colorado, sex assault victims have that right, they have a decision, whether or not the police are notified. So a sex assault victim can go to the hospital and decline to have the law enforcement notified. And I respect that and understand that. But my point is, it's their decision, not the campus's or school's decision. And then we have what I would very grateful for, and it predates my becoming district attorney. We have the best sex assault unit in the entire state of Colorado, in any DA's office. And we have incredibly dedicated and skilled prosecutors and investigators in my office who handle those cases. And they fight for victims every day in sex assault cases. So we're working very closely, and it's an active investigation right now. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, so I guess in that one instance there were 21 victims who were all drugged. When it comes to sticking in a group, I know that I would never go out with more than 21 people in my group. So likely, if I got drugged or someone in my group got drugged with mass amounts of people getting drugged. The whole group did. How are you guys holding the fraternities responsible for the mass amount of victims who are getting drugged at these parties?
So, good question. The number of victims has fluctuated depending on who you ask or what media outlet you look at. I will say that part of what happens in cases involving possible drugging is how quickly the victim is taken to the hospital is really important, because the drugs get out of one system very quickly. So if you have a friend, if you're ever in that situation, you have a friend who says, I think I was drugged, encouraging them to go to the hospital as quickly as possible is really key. They don't have to go forward with the prosecution, they don't have to notify law enforcement. But the faster that blood test is conducted, the better the odds of us getting accurate results of any drug that's in the bloodstream. They're gone very quickly. They're not the only evidence that we need to go forward with a case, but it's critical evidence to have a blood test that shows what was in the individual's bloodstream. As for the fraternities, we have jurisdiction over criminal cases, so we can prosecute anyone for criminal offense if they've committed a crime, obviously. So some of this is civil, and that'll be left up to the university and also to the fraternity itself. In terms of our office, would be a review of whether any criminal conduct was committed by people who were located there or the fraternity itself. What was your question?
I was lucky enough to be an intern for a judge in Broomfield area, and I was able to sit in with the DA office, and they just had like thousands of cases like every day that they would filter through. Like, so how do you guys like organize that? Because I sat in with one of them, and she was just like mass amounts of cases on her computer. So.
Right. So it's a good question. How do we deal with a high case volume? And that's really the challenge that every DA's office has, not just in Colorado, but throughout the nation. First, it starts with the commitment to recognizing that although it's one of hundreds of cases that we have, thousands of cases we have, that it's the most important case to that victim, to the community, and to the accused. So making sure that we give the case our full attention and that we recognize the importance of the case to everybody involved. So just starting with that as a principle that drives us, making sure we stay in touch with the victim, the defense attorney, and law enforcement that are involved in the case is another part of it, so that we learn anything that may not be contained in the file and that they know that we're doing everything we can to reach the right result. Also, just being organized, it's not the most exciting thing I'll say here today, but being really organized is key, and also prioritizing cases, figuring out which cases are the most important that you have in terms of the charges, what happened to the victim, the impact on the community, what the defendant faces if he's convicted, and over time you get better at that. So when I started, I was a misdemeanor prosecutor at the Manhattan DA's office, and at any given time I'd have 400 cases in my file cabinet. So if you think about having 400 different things you're responsible for, and people would call and I'd be going through the file cabinet scurrying to figure out which case it is. But you get better at figuring out these are the cases that may go to trial, these are the cases that are particularly important for the victim and the defendant, and these are the cases that are problematic that I need to do more work on. You get better at prioritizing those as you go on. But you're absolutely right. So when we hire people, we want people who are going to work really hard and who can be organized. Not everybody operates the same style or system, but they have to be able to stay on top of their work. Yes?
Question, follow-up to the previous one from my online class. When you were working in the sex crimes unit, this person wants to know, how did you contain your anger and disgust toward the people you were prosecuting?
It's a great question. So, on a personal level, I actually find it much easier to contain my emotions if I'm working on the case myself. So what I mean by that is if you have a job to do and you have many different things on the list that you need to go through to make sure that you're doing the right thing with the case, then you stay focused on the work because you recognize how important it is. So I've always thought of it in this fashion, where if the victim is crying in a sex assault case and I'm crying with her or with him, then who's going to be handling the case? So trying to keep that in mind and stay focused on the work. And there's so much work to be done, and the job is really important. And so what I find is the emotion is what drives our ability to work hard. So we put that emotion into our work ethic and our passion in presenting the case to the court and to the jury. So it's not that we're robots, we're certainly not, and I see people affected a lot in my office, and we have vicarious trauma training, we have a private counselor that they can go to that we pay for out of the office budget. We have things in place now that did not exist when I started to do a better job in helping support the staff that could be impacted. And we have staff that work on and in the sex crimes unit, I would do this all the time, the child porn cases. So you're looking at child porn yourself to try to prepare for trial and figure out what photos am I going to use, what videos am I going to use in trying this case, or what photos or videos am I going to consider as criminal charges against this person. You're seeing things that people should not have to see, right? I mean, some of you look uncomfortable even hearing about it. So, but the emotion of that is what drives us to do the job that we need to do. So we try to put it into the work. And I find that when I hear about cases from outside my office, so cases that I don't have anything to do with, those cases have a different impact on me emotionally. So we have this horrific murder in Weld County where the guy just pled guilty to killing his wife and their 2 young daughters, and the wife was pregnant. He just pled guilty earlier this week. He's going to go to prison for the rest of his life instead of facing the death penalty. So that case, and I find myself thinking about that case and saying that case is just horrific in a different way than if it's a case that's in my office. We have murder cases in my office, but I'm really focused on the work that needs to be done. So that's how I take a step back. But I will say to the person who asked the question, we've come a long way in 20 years in terms of recognizing the impact that these things have on people. When I started, there was no private counselor available or support system, like Carrier's trauma specialist that would come into the office. And quite frankly, at that point in my life, if you told me, hey, we have a counselor available, the way I was hardwired, I probably would not have gone. It's not that I'm saying I would have gone. But they were not even options. And now our office is leading the way, along with a couple other offices around the state, having these resources available for people who want to go and check in and recognize the impact that these cases have on one's life. Yes, sir.
Kind of going to what you're talking about, the restorative programs for identifying and helping those who have mental health issues with less serious crimes. Kind of actually using a very recent example, the shooting last night in Los Angeles. They are talking, this individual had prior engagements with police. He was identified of having mental health issues. However, they determined it wasn't serious enough and nothing had gone on that, which obviously was a huge mistake. Is there anything that you can do to possibly follow up to, if something's not seen serious right away, to follow up without any kind of further criminal activity, just to kind of check up on?
It's a great question. Everybody hear the question? Okay. So let me back up one step as I start to answer this question. I'll start by saying we need to do, as a society, a much better job in treating mental health issues. We need to have far more resources available in the community. Colorado is currently ranked 43rd in the nation in mental health resources available in the community. So we're doing a lot of work in my office now to address mental health issues. The greatest challenge we will face going forward is that when you're 43rd in the nation, it shouldn't be that people have to hit the doors of the jail and the courthouse to get treatment. There should be people available in the community to help them and serve them and provide more treatment. And we need to do a better job as a society, and I think we have, over time, gotten a bit better, but recognizing that when someone has a mental illness, it's the same as if someone has a broken arm. So if you have a broken arm and your friends see you, they would say, how are you? Are you okay? When are you going to be better? What can I do to help? Can I carry your stuff? What can I do? If, however, the student sitting in this chair, the invisible student here, it has depression, some of you might be thinking, come on, just suck it up, deal with it, move on. You gotta handle it yourself. Or you feel awkward talking about it, or you don't know how to respond when they share with you, or they don't even share with you because they're embarrassed, because we don't look at depression the same way we look at the broken arm. Until we as a society start to recognize that they're both injuries, illnesses, then we're gonna struggle to meet the needs of the community when people are suffering from mental health issues. So one thing about the criminal justice system, Lisa, do you have a marker? So this is a longer answer, but this is how I view what I do and then your question. So one of the things I love about the criminal justice system is, let's say this is the criminal justice arena, okay? That's the area where all the cases come in, the fights are battled, and things are decided, and cases are resolved. If you identify any problem in our country, any problem, so mental illness ends up in the criminal justice system in one form or another. If If you think we have racism and implicit bias in law enforcement or in our communities, which I think we do, ends up in the criminal justice system in one form or another. Poverty, problems with education, the list goes on. All of those tend to appear in different cases in the criminal justice system. So we have better systems in place now to try to address those things, such as our mental health diversion project. But we're also trying to fix them in some ways on the back end. We need to do a better job in our communities fixing these things up front and trying to address inequities and problems before they hit the criminal justice system. So mental health is a particularly difficult one and one that I feel very passionate about. So we started this mental health diversion project, as I mentioned. We have a number of different efforts underway to try to get people with mental health disorders out of the criminal justice system and connected to treatment. I will share with you that, so I was unfamiliar, or I read the story this morning. I had not yet heard that he had mental health issues or prior interactions with police. I believe you, I'm just saying.
I just happened to hear that on my way in this morning, so.
So this is the part that members of the general public probably don't know or understand. How many people come across our radar in the criminal justice system as being possible threats? It happens all the time. And I feel, I don't know anything about this particular case other than the shooting itself and how many people were killed. But there are so many cases in the United States now where we have these mass shootings, and then it'll be reported in the media, law enforcement had some awareness, where this person had a mental health issue. And yes, that should be alarming. But I think the next question has to be asked is, what should they have done about it? That's a hard question, actually. What should they do about it? So I'll give you an example. Guy, this is a real case. Guy calls the Golden police chief, leaves him a voicemail. And on the voicemail, he says the following: I'm a pacifist, so I'm not threatening you myself, but because of you and city council and your failures, you're all gonna be dead by Monday. And I just wanna let you know that you're all gonna be dead. And I hope it doesn't happen, but it is gonna happen, and he leaves this long rambling message. He clearly, if you just heard the voicemail, you would know he has mental health issues, and we confirmed he has mental health issues. What do you do with that? I mean, really, what are your thoughts? What should we do? Because if he had gone on to kill city council and the police chief on Monday, the media and the community would have said, why didn't you do something? Why wasn't something done? Well, let's go back in time to that moment in that voicemail, because the police chief calls me that Friday night. These things always have a way of happening on Friday nights, by the way. Calls me at home on Friday night and says, I've just sent you a voicemail. Can you listen to it and tell me, what do I do? And he has his authority and discretion, it's up to him, but we had a really close working relationship, so he was looking for my advice. What do I tell him? Does this actually happen? What should I have told him at that time? These are where it's hard, right? So we had a couple options. So I'll give you some options since we're all wondering what we could do. One is to have the guy arrested for harassment, because you actually can't make a phone call like that and threaten someone. That's harassment. Difficult case to prove perhaps, because he says, I'm a pacifist and I'm not threatening you, but you need to know you and city council will be killed. And there's a reason he said I'm a pacifist, right? So that he would not be arrested for it. Arguably, he could be arrested for harassment. If he's arrested for harassment, he would automatically be released after seeing a judge. So you'd have a restraining order from the judge, but then he'd be back out in the community. We don't, in Colorado, have anything under our law currently that allowed the police to go into his house to look for guns. He's a veteran. We suspected that he had firearms, and he had talked about firearms in the past with different encounters with law enforcement. But we didn't have enough for a search warrant to go into his house. We have probable cause that there's evidence for a crime in order to get a warrant to go into someone's house. So this is what I mean. This is really hard. So just to bring it to life for you, so that happens on Friday night. We talked to, he had a doctor that we ended up connecting with, and the doctor talked to the police, so to the extent the doctor could. A lot of it's protected by medical privilege. The following weekend, I take my kids to a parade in Golden. And I'm standing there with my kids, at the time they're 9-year-old twins. And I'm standing there, I suddenly realize, how am I in a public place in Golden right now? I know this guy is here in Golden talking about killing people. What do you do with that? That kind of threat happens so often. That's the part that is disturbing to me. So this Monday in my office on my Facebook Messenger, I got some guy saying he's gonna be extremely disruptive when he comes for jury service, and we're gonna regret that we called him for jury service. Just a random guy on my Facebook Messenger. So we'll be prepared, the courthouse security will be prepared. Later that day, law enforcement sends me a voicemail from some woman who's threatening to kill them because of something, kill the police department. She's like, I'm gonna kill the officers in the police department because of something that happened with her son when he was arrested. That was Monday of this week. So my point is this, is the number of people who end up going across our radar where if I had a button and every time I was worried this person could commit a mass shooting, I'd be hitting that button probably once a day. And that's just me. I'm not counting all the prosecutors in my office and all members of law enforcement. So it's hard to identify who's just making noise on Facebook, who's drunk and leaving a voicemail for law enforcement that's threatening, and who's a real threat. That's hard. And even if you could identify with 100% certainty who the real threats are, we don't have great systems in place for there's a reason none of you raised your hand when I said, what did we do with the guy with the phone call, right? Because I don't think any of you were saying, take him and lock him away for the rest of his life. That's not an option in our country, nor should it be. But what do you do? Those are hard situations. The guy in Golden, for example, he continued to threaten the police chief and city council. He was arrested. He ultimately was charged with harassment. So we went to the psychologist who specializes in these issues, who said you have to draw lines and make sure he understands these are the lines, you cross the line, there'll be a response from law enforcement and prosecution. Ultimately ended up being prosecuted for a felony because he tried to keep the police chief from taking some action. The charge is attempt to influence a public official. So he's charged with a felony and prosecuted, and he's out in the community again. So God forbid he ever does anything, the question will be, how is he back out in the community? But the real question should be, what systems do we have in place to treat him in the first place, and what do we do with the many, many people that would cause me to hit that button? That's a heavy topic for us, I know that, but I think it's something that people don't recognize. So, or no, you shouldn't know. You're not in, if you're not in that world, you wouldn't know how many people fly across that radar of possible threat. But that's the reality of where we are right now, and figuring out how to make sure we have the best possible systems to prevent these things from happening, and then the best possible response when it does happen. Any follow-up questions on that? So, and I'll,
One of my online students asked something that seemed relevant because, what you were saying about you and the boys being at a parade and thinking about all these things, and that there's more treatment and there's more options for the people who work in these areas. One of my online students asked about emotions running high in the office. Like how do you guys handle the day-to-day interactions that can, where you're people, you can lose your temper, so everybody sort of thinks of it as being sort of smooth going until you get into court and, do the thing, but what's it like in the office?
good question. So part of it is we put our energy in trying to figure out ways to develop systems that prevent these things from happening. So for example, we'll be working, this legislative session starts in January. I'll be working on a red flag law here in Colorado, which other states have. A red flag law would allow family members or law enforcement to go to the court and petition a court for an emergency order to seize someone's firearms if they're in the midst of a mental health crisis that indicates they can cause harm to themselves or to others. 87% of Coloradans agree that we should have this law, and yet it failed in the legislature last session. It died on party lines. And in my mind, that should never have failed. We should have a red flag law where for the guy who makes that phone call, the family and or law enforcement can go to the court and through a court process, through due process, obtain a temporary right to seize the firearms. Temporary meaning just 10 days, and the person is entitled to a court hearing to get their firearms back. But those are the kinds of protections that we need. So we continue to put a lot of our energy into trying to change the system for the better and prevent people from causing harm to themselves or others. And I emphasize themselves because in Colorado, for the last, from 2010 through 16, we had over 10,000 people kill themselves. So those are not criminal offenses, but certainly those matter to all of us. So figuring out ways to make sure that people are being helped and treated when they need to be. So how do we take care of ourselves in the office? Part of it is you develop perspective over time. These things happen. So I used the golden example, but that was 3 or 4 years ago now. So these things happen, and you learn that a lot of these things occur. They can cause anxiety, but they're almost always going to resolve peacefully and calmly. Almost always. So you get used to seeing these things, but part of it is training our newer people to recognize that as well. So I had a defendant recently who received a plea offer and accepted the plea offer, then write a letter to me saying he demands that I fire the 2 deputy DAs who worked on the case, they both knew, and then resign myself. And if I do that, he won't sue the county for $5 million, he'll only sue them for $4 million. I mean, this is real. So he'll take $1 million off the top if I fire the 2 deputy DAs and then resign myself. And the letter was kind of long and rambling and so on. But the deputies were shaken up by this letter, like, what do we do? I'm like, we're okay. First of all, you're not being fired, I'm not resigning, we're gonna be all right, we worked through this, and he doesn't have a legal claim, we have a process for addressing this is gonna be okay. And just assuring them that we know how to handle these things when they come in the door. And then trying to take care of one another, make sure that people aren't being, feeling threatened or feeling too much anxiety. That's why we have these systems in place. And I try to talk with staff fairly often about taking care of themselves and taking care of one another and making sure that the emotions of the things we work on and the emotions of the things that are involved don't impact us, our judgment, or our personal lives. And that's really important. I think part of the challenge that we have also is keeping in mind that we're also people, right? So as a prosecutor, I've been doing this for 21 years. So I've had days where I've gone to work where my parents were sick, both my parents have passed, or I was in the midst of a breakup, or my kid was sick, or whatever it might be. We're people, so you're still being impacted. So whether it's a personal crisis or professional crisis, recognizing that things have an impact and never letting it impact your judgment, making sure if you feel like that's happening, getting support from your colleagues and from the office. So overall, I would say we have high morale in our office, which I know is a weird way to wrap up that segment of this conversation, but we have high morale, people love what they're doing. You also develop a thick skin and a sense of humor that you probably shouldn't share at a coffee shop if people are listening in, but you have a sense of humor in a way of laughing things off and rolling with it. But it all comes from perspective. So if you do this job for a while, you start to realize what things are truly scary and then how to respond to those things. And everything else is important and you have to address it, but it's just low level and it's almost certainly just gonna pass. What other questions about that? I will say, because that's a really heavy topic, I'm trying to become a positive person, so I'm trying to find a way out of it, onto another subject. But I will say, and I'm gonna take your 2 questions in a second, there are so many funny moments in the criminal justice system. There are some great, great stories that happen all the time, because it's where life and fate and people all collide, and sometimes from those experiences you have funny moments, or you have things that happen in court where afterwards you're laughing in the hallway. So there's actually a lot of camaraderie that goes into it too. Yes?
I was gonna help you change the subject. What do you think about like all of the social justice, criminal justice class last year? And like, what do you think about all you said you worked on cases that like people ended up being innocent. What do you think about like all the cases like that are getting attention from like Netflix and stuff and like what do you think about all of that?
So, a few things. First, we're absolutely committed to making sure that justice is done, and if someone's actually innocent, they should not be prosecuted, nor should they be convicted, and if they are, we should go back and reverse that mistake as soon as we learn about it. I think these things are good in that they call to attention times where the system has failed. I think one thing we probably don't have out there in the general public enough is how many times the system works really well. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In Manhattan, they have 95,000 cases a year. 95,000. So what percentage or number of those do you think were people who were actually innocent? 1 is too many. 1 is too many. But when you start to think about it in numbers and think about how often the system works the way it should, it puts it in a different perspective than you probably see when you watch Netflix. What you don't see when you watch, what we don't see when we watch TV and the movies often is there are so many times where the case is relatively straightforward. It's really important, challenging, and serious, but also straightforward. So guy A is upset at guy B, guy A pulls out a gun and shoots guy B, and then confesses to police, he's prosecuted, he's convicted, case is over. It's almost, it's unusual that it even be reported in the media. We have so many of those cases where they're relatively straightforward, that I think we should do a better job communicating that to the community. I do think we have probably the best justice system in the world, but it also needs a lot of improvement. I think what makes our justice system strong is a couple things that are fairly unique to the United States. First, if the police violate someone's constitutional rights, the evidence is suppressed. So if the police just come in here and start searching your bag and find a bag of cocaine or some contraband there, and they searched it for no reason, the evidence would be suppressed and the case would have to be dismissed. Other countries don't have that. We also have a jury system. We have members from the community act as a check on the government. That's why when you get your jury summons, it's always, or often looked at as inconvenient. It's probably our most important civic duty, that we have an opportunity to go into the criminal justice and make sure the government's doing the right thing. And I think having that jury system is a strong tenet of who we are. But I think those shows, I think those movies are good in that they help people be aware of the system, that it's not perfect, and what we need to make it better. Yes?
So you were talking about making that law, the red flag one, how much of your time is spent like working on cases and how much is spent doing more government?
So as the elected DA, I have a number of different priorities. I need to help lead the office, manage the office. The budget is an important part of what we do. I still will always handle cases myself because I think it's important to help with the workload. And it's also what I love doing as a prosecutor. So I have currently 4 cases that I'm working on, 1 homicide and 2 homicide, 2 sex assaults, and then 1 medicine case. But so I'll get on cases throughout the year. I also oversee the major cases, so people will come to me on major case decisions and we'll work through those together. During the legislative session, which in Colorado is from January through May, we have a statewide organization that takes the lead on behalf of all the district attorneys, and I help out with that as much as I can and as much as they need. So I don't have an exact percentage for you, but I try to be in the office as much as I can during the day, and then in the community as often as we can. So for example, when Lisa invites me down here, I want to be here, in part because I think building more transparency between the public and the criminal justice system is a top priority, and also building more trust. Again, I'm not trying to sell you on the system being perfect, that's not what I'm saying. But I think the more conversations we have like this, the more people can trust the criminal justice system. That trust is really important to me, because if someone sees a crime or is victimized, they should know that they can come forward and there are people who are going to do the very best they can to secure justice. And I've had cases, including a shooting in New York, that was witnessed by about 40 people. It was a fist fight, so everybody was looking at the fist fight first, and then it became a shooting. None of them, 0, cooperated with the prosecution. And to me, that's when this trust between the community and law enforcement, the community and the justice system is broken. And that meant the gun was still out there, perpetrator was still out there, the victim did not have justice. In fact, the victim survived the shooting. And this kind of captured the point, which is, I was meeting with him, and I was explaining to him why he should cooperate. He seemed to know who shot him. And I was like, I need you to tell me, and we'll work on it, we'll bring the person to the courthouse. And he said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I'm like, see, no, now actually I'm very worried. I don't want you to take care of it. That's just gonna lead to more problems. So trying to build that trust in the system is a really important part of what we do. So we do a ton of community outreach in my office. So let's talk about.
Has the work that you've done in criminal justice reform changed your perspective about the criminal system?
So yes, it has. It's changed my perspective about the system because it's helped me to recognize how we could do things better. And the changes we've made that have helped improve the system have led to, I think, an enhanced justice system, a system that people can put more faith and trust in. It's also a lot of the reforms we've worked on. So for example, eyewitness identification reform. We changed eyewitness practices by law enforcement. So for example, previously, law enforcement in Colorado, if you were a sex assault victim and the person got away, and the police were looking for the person, they would call you and say, we got the guy, come on down to the police department. Well, sure enough, research indicated that when the police say we got the guy to the victim, that predisposes them to go in and identify someone. And let's say they go in and then they identify someone and the police say, you got it right, that's the guy. That cements in the person's mind that person's face. And that's how wrongful identifications happen. So we changed eyewitness practices in Colorado statewide. And we did that in conjunction with law enforcement, the DAs, but also the Innocence Project and the Defense Bar. And we can make a lot of change when we work together and we collaborate. And I've always believed that although the system is adversarial, the relationships need not be. So yesterday for lunch, I went to the lunch meeting for 50 criminal defense attorneys in Boulder. Not all of them agree with what we're doing, not all of them agree with our stance on different things, but just having a discussion about here are the priorities for the office, here are filing rates, here are different initiatives, what questions and complaints do you have, and just having that discussion is really important. So I think if we can get along as defense attorneys and prosecutors, we do a better job, more effectively and efficiently for the victims, the offenders, and the community. So I have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to start talking about the role of media relations, but feel free to keep asking questions as we go through this. One of the interesting things about being a prosecutor is there are ethical rules that define how much we can share with the community while a case is pending. And that requires prosecutors to be fairly restrained in what they say. And the overarching goal of it is to avoid public condemnation of the accused. So to avoid tarnishing someone's reputation and also tainting the jury pool, potential jurors, against an individual. So for example, let's say the shooter in this morning or last night's attacks survived. He's passed, he's dead. But let's say he survived and he's going to be prosecuted. The prosecutor could say, he's been arrested, he's been charged with the following charges, he's the only shooter or the only person involved, there are no additional suspects, we believe the community is safe, and the case is now going to be prosecuted by my office. The DA cannot say, he confessed, so we know it's him. He confessed, we know it's a strong case, he's definitely going down, he's a terrible person, I'm gonna make sure he ends up in prison for the rest of his life. All those statements are prohibited by the ethical rules. So anytime we're dealing with the media, we're always trying to figure out how much can I say. Where that becomes difficult, and an example I'll share with you is with officer-involved shootings. And I think that's where we still have a ways to go as a law enforcement and justice community, because of how fast technology's developed and how quickly people want the information. So I'll come up with a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you have an unarmed individual and he gets into an interaction with the police and the police are wearing body cameras, and during that interaction he lunges for the gun of the officer, grabs the gun of the officer, another officer pulls out his taser, tases the individual, doesn't work. Not everybody who's tased has an immediate physical reaction. Individual continues to struggle for the gun, and the officer then pulls out his firearm and kills, or shoots and wounds, doesn't kill, shoots and wounds that unarmed civilian. Assume for a moment that the community has a very visceral reaction to the fact that the police have shot an individual who was unarmed. Assume that the man's family says he was attacked by the police for no reason. He was just walking down the street, and whether it's race or what have you, the police just decided to attack him, and they shot him. Now, the police chief and the DA have an opportunity to talk to the community through the media about the case. But you also have to be careful, as a district attorney, to not reveal evidence that would tarnish the reputation of the accused or taint the jury pool. So one of the areas that we have a lot of debate about currently, and there's no right answer to this, is how quickly do you release the body camera video to the public? On one hand, the body camera video in that case may show that the officers acted properly. The guy attacked them, reached for the gun, had his hand on the gun, was pulling the gun out, and so on. Or maybe you think the officers are going to be criminally charged. Maybe they did something wrong. And the officers have a right to be free from a tainted jury pool. So let's assume for a moment either one. Let's assume as DA, I think the officers committed the crime. I could not, under the ethical rules, get up there and say, cops who commit crimes are not going to be tolerated by my office. This is outrageous conduct and they're going to be convicted, ladies and gentlemen. I promise you that right now. I cannot ethically, legally say that. I should not say that. Yet the community wants, especially in a 24/7 news cycle, immediate answers, right? And deserves. I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong. They want immediate answers on, was this justified or not? Who's being charged? What's going to happen with the case? And that's a really fine balance, especially in today's day and age where you have body camera videos and you have a 24/7 news cycle, deciding what information to get out there. So a good example would be there was a University of Cincinnati police officer who killed a gentleman who was in his car a couple of years ago. You may recall this. And I was shocked by the press conference announcing that the officer was going to be charged. So the officer was going to be charged with criminal offenses. I was not shocked by the fact that he was being charged. It looked like it was the right thing when I watched the video. But I was shocked by how the DA, the elected attorney, presented it. Because he said, and forgive me for my language, he said, I've never seen such chicken shit police work in my entire life. This guy's a murderer. He murdered that man. And even if he was right about that, you're not permitted to say that. You can't tell the media that while the case is pending. After the case is over, you can say a lot. After the case is resolved, and the defendant's constitutional rights have been preserved, and the case has been concluded, you're free to say a lot. But even now, if you go on our office Facebook page, which I encourage you to follow us on Facebook, you'll see I talk a lot about cases from other jurisdictions and cases that have been resolved. You'll see very little mention, if anything at all, about cases that are currently pending. So I'm really cautious about impacting the potential jury pool. So if you have a potential juror who's in the community, who 3 months from now, coincidentally ends up being a juror in that case, they're gonna say, yeah, I saw Michael Dougherty put stuff on Facebook about this case. So I'm really careful about how much we put out there. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention when it comes to media relations. I will share as a young prosecutor that I used to think there shouldn't be such a, I thought my office was wrong to focus on cases that were in the media. And by that I mean this. So the first case I had 400 cases. No one in the office, we had such a high volume, no one in the office seemed to be paying much attention to the cases I had. They trusted me to use my discretion to do the right thing, but it wasn't like the heads of the office would come in to visit me and say, how's work going, what are you doing? There were 1,300 people there. Then I had this case where this woman had, she got a credit card bill, and she looked at the credit card bill and she had credit card payments for breast enhancements, which she had not had. And she was trying to figure out who used her credit card falsely to obtain breast enhancements, excuse me. When her daughter-in-law came over that weekend to visit, let's just say she pieced it all together and realized who used the credit card for the breast enhancements. That's the kind of case that New York tabloid media just loves. I mean, that was on the front page for like 2 or 3 days. I mean, just different witty headlines. And suddenly my supervisor's like, what's going on with that case? What's going on with that case? I'm like, why do you care? Let's just treat every case the same. And it took me a while as a prosecutor to realize, yes, they wanted me to still treat every case the same, do the right thing regardless of media attention, but that the media is the gateway for us developing community trust. And then if we're gonna give people an understanding of what goes on in our cases and what we're doing in our office, the media is a really important, I'll say partner, I don't mean partner because we're agreeing on things, but I mean important gateway tool, gateway to that conversation. That if you want to connect with the community, if you want to build trust, if you want to deal with issues, communicating through the media is important. So for example, my staff, I just met with them the other day to talk about different office priorities. I emphasized again, any case that's going to be in the media when charges are filed or in the media when it's being resolved, I want to know about in advance. Do the right thing, don't change what you're doing. Do the absolute right thing, but just give me a heads up so that if someone asks in the community, or if I get a call from the press, I can let them know what's going on with the case. So having a strong relationship with the media is ideal because it allows us to have a good working relationship, not only with them, but with the community. So what questions do you have about media relations or cases of that nature?
Well, if you have your questions, would you tell them the story about the bike lock battery and the MTA?
Sure.
I think that really illustrates a lot of what you're saying.
Yes. I'm still actually traumatized by the whole thing. But I'm gonna share it with you anyway. But no, and Lisa's right. It was a real growth point for me in my career. I was a young prosecutor, and I had 2 cases on this particular day. One was sentencing after a trial. So the trial had already been conducted, defendant was found guilty. In that case, there were 2 delivery people, victim and defendant. They had never met before, they worked for different restaurants. They were riding down the street in opposite directions. And as so often happens in our criminal cases, fate just brought them together. They just brushed handlebars, I mean, just barely touched. And that led to them stopping and turning around and yelling at one another. And as they were screaming at one another, some passerby said, "Knock it off." We never identified who that was, but knock it off. The victim looked at the passerby, then turned back, and the defendant had taken his bike lock and smashed the victim in the face with the bike lock and blinded him in one eye and just crushed this whole side of his face. So not only was he a delivery person, he also sang in the choir for his church. He can no longer ride a bike or sing in the choir based on the injuries that he suffered. He was in the hospital for 7 days. On the 8th day, he got out of the hospital. And there have been no eyewitnesses, even though it was a crowded street. In fact, the first 911 callers thought, given the damage to his head, that he'd been run over by a car. The first few people were calling 911 saying this guy had his head run over by a car. He did not speak English, he spoke Mandarin. So by the time they got a Mandarin-speaking police officer there, the defendant was long gone. So when the victim got out of the hospital, he walked around that area knowing that if you're a delivery person on a bike in New York City, you probably work near that location. You don't do bike deliveries 5 miles away, right? So just walk the whole day until he spotted the guy and found the guy. And that was really the only evidence we had in the case. So pretty intense case, all around case about whether we had the right person or not. Went to trial, ultimately he was convicted. And on the day he was being sentenced, his sister, who weighed about 90 pounds soaking wet, attacked the courtroom deputies as they were about to take the defendant into custody. So it was this whole thing. So in that case, it had never been in the media, it was not reported, but to me it was one of my, if not the most important case that I had going at that point. And then when the sister attacks, and I'm standing there in court, I'm watching this happen, it was just crazy, that doesn't often happen. I left, I go across the street to the other courtroom. The other case I had on that day was just on for a court appearance. They come in to check the status of the case and talk about trial dates and so on. That defendant is what's called a transit buff. They've actually made a documentary about him now. You can watch it called, I have not yet watched it, it's called Off the Rails. But anyway, he was a guy who, whether or not it was due to him having Asperger's syndrome, he would, since age 15, steal subway trains and city buses and then drive them around on their route. So he'd actually drive the train, drive the bus. So in my case, he was driving a New York City subway train with about 1,000 people on it. And whether accidentally or intentionally hit the emergency brake on the train, and when the police responded, they recognized him. He was well known throughout the transit system. So he was being prosecuted by me, it was my case. And on that day when I showed up in court, nothing was supposed to happen. But surprisingly, he suddenly said, "I want to plead guilty." And he took a state prison sentence and agreed to go to state prison, and he pled guilty. And later that day, the public information officer for the office called me and said, "I need to speak with you, I'm really angry at you. Because you didn't give me a heads up in advance about the subway defendant pleading guilty." I said, "Well, I didn't know. I had no idea, but I'll come to your office." And she was very good at her job, in part because she was strong personality, and she told me it's the most important case we have in this office today. I said, "This is not the most important case I have is the one that I was at right before." And we had this whole argument, but her point was, it's the most important case of the office because the media is communicating with the community about this case. That conversation did not go well, by the way, but it was a good learning experience for me to realize what she was trying to say, which is even though that case had lower charges and wasn't that difficult to figure out what happened, wasn't as compelling as the case where I'd just been in the sentencing, that was the case that was going to be reported on in the media, and that's how the community was going to learn about our work. So she had a really important job, and I was young enough and foolish enough then that I didn't totally recognize it. That was an important step in me coming to realize the value of the media in our society, especially in 2018, right? At a time where we have reason to be really concerned about what's going on in our country. The media is and should be a watchdog. What I would love to see for us as a country is less polarized media. So media channels, media outlets that you could trust or that are objective. So for example, when I'm at the gym and if I'm on the machine and I flick around, they're talking about the same things but in completely different ways. And you know this already. But that's why I listen to this podcast called Left, Right, and Center. If you haven't listened to it, I encourage you to listen to it. It's just someone on the left, someone on the right, and someone in the center, and they just talk. No screaming, no yelling. It's an hour long, they talk about different issues, and I get to absorb it. The point being, We need more objective media outlets so people can learn about what's going on in our country and act on it to make change and to make things better. What other questions do you have? I have 5 minutes left. Yes?
Is there a job that like specifically relates media with like somebody that reports specifically for your office or anything like that? Like how do you get to that kind of job?
So we have a public information officer in my office. We're a big enough office that we should have one, and a small enough office that she also has other responsibilities in addition to being the public information officer. Larger offices have one full-time PIO doing just that. You can do that coming out of college. It's also a great way to intern with an office, and if you want to intern with me, I encourage you to shoot me an email, and we'd be happy to set you up with that. And you learn about what can be said and what can be shared with the media at what points. So for example, if they call and say, I want an arrest photo or a mugshot, if it's an adult, the media gets it. If it's a juvenile, you cannot release it. So you learn those rules about, because the juveniles have different privacy rights. What can be released and when, what can be shared with the media, and the PIO plays a really important role in our office. Okay, so a couple, yes?
Please, go ahead.
No, good.
I was just gonna say, I have one last question I thought would kind of
Sure.
wrap up for you, which is, why do you still want to do this job?
So good question. I was just looking down to see what haven't I talked about, and I realized why I still do this job is the one area seriously that I haven't addressed. So let me answer Lisa's question. It's a good question. I'm actually a really positive person, and I remain positive, and the reason I want to do this job and I feel passionate about it is twofold. First, I believe in the human condition. I believe that people can get better and do better. And by that I mean, when I go to the playground with my kids and I look around, I never think people are hardwired to be evil. Others feel that way, I don't feel that way. I don't go to a park and think, all right, here's a bunch of 10-year-olds, one of them is gonna be a mass murderer. It's not how I think. I think we have an opportunity as a society, including in the justice system, to deal with these challenges and to help people get back on the right track. So I'm really motivated by that. I also recognize that when these things happen, I want to try to make a difference. I want to try to make things better. I want to be part of the response. So I think about, for example, the Aurora movie theater shooting. And I remember that that morning, the Attorney General asked me to go on behalf of the Attorney General's office to the movie theater. And my wife said to me, be careful, be really careful. And I said what you should say in that situation to a loved one, which is, I will. What I was really thinking is, I'll get there, there'll be like 100 cops there, I'm the attorney showing up. There's not gonna be any danger by the time I get there. That's why law enforcement has a much tougher job, as evidenced by the law enforcement officer who ran into the bar last night, who made the ultimate sacrifice. But I got there and there were actually 350 law enforcement officers there. Not 100, 350. And then you look at the community response. And be part of the response to things like that is something that I feel passionate about. You can see dark, ugly things, but you can also be part of the response to make those things better and to make sure the right thing happens. So I'm really pushed by how many amazing people respond to different things, not just prosecutors and law enforcement, victim advocates, and the community as a whole. And I look at that and I think the more we can do as a community, the more we can limit people from doing these things. Well, we're probably not going to eliminate all of it in my lifetime, I recognize that. But I want to be part of the effort to make things better, right? There's enough going on in the world. It doesn't have to be in criminal justice, but there are challenging things going on in the world. And I'd much rather be in the arena fighting for what I believe in, as opposed to just sitting behind Facebook and making comments all day. So I can see that in your faces, that you want to do that in your respective fields, and I hope you do, because we need great people like you engaged in the fight, whatever it might be. You might be Republican, you might be Democrat, I don't care. My point is, be engaged, stand up for what you believe in, and fight for what you believe in. So that's why I still do this work.
Present for you.
Present.
Yeah, that's gonna be the hats, I hope you guys like them.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
this is our new
I like that.
communications
That's
chair.
great.
Michael's a long distance runner,
Yes.
so he will be wearing that throughout Boulder, we hope, letting them know
I
where
will.
they really should be going to school.
And
What, you mean at CU?
At CU Denver.
If you need anything or have interest in any story or article, one of the great things about Boulder is we have actually 2 daily newspapers. So we have a lot of media focus on our cases. So if you ever look at the Daily Camera or the Longmont Times Call and you have questions about cases, or if you want to intern in the office, don't hesitate to reach out to me, okay? Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.